My name is Natalia, and I'll never forget the night my own sister told me I was too fat to be her maid of honor. It happened at her bridal shower, of all places, a night that was supposed to be about joy, love, and celebration. The room was warm with soft lights strung across the ceiling, glasses of champagne clinking, and relatives buzzing with excitement about Sophia's upcoming wedding. She was glowing, of course, in her designer dress, with all eyes on her as she opened gifts and giggled with her friends. Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're on the right side. Anyways, I was sitting across the table, smiling, despite the lump in my throat that always formed when Sophia commanded the room. I wanted to be happy for her, I really did. She was my sister, after all. But I could already feel the subtle digs starting that evening, the comparisons, the side glances, the familiar sense of being the lesser one sitting in her shadow. Then someone, maybe an aunt, asked the question everyone had been dancing around. "So, Sophia, have you picked your maid of honor yet?" The room went quiet, all eyes on her, waiting for the grand reveal. I didn't dare hope she'd say my name, though a small, foolish part of me wanted to believe she might. We'd grown up together, shared secrets as kids, even fought like sisters do. Despite everything, a piece of me thought blood might still matter. But Sophia leaned back in her chair, smirking, and let out a laugh that dripped with cruelty. "Oh, please," she said, her eyes flicking toward me. "Natalia's too fat to be my maid of honor. Can you imagine her in those photos? I want everything perfect." For a heartbeat, the words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Then came the laughter. It started with a few chuckles, then grew into a wave that rolled around the table. Her friends laughed. Our cousins laughed. Even some of the older relatives, the ones who should have known better, hid their smiles behind their glasses. The sound pressed into me, hot and suffocating. I sat frozen, my cheeks burning, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly I thought I might snap it in two. I forced a smile, small, weak, because what else could I do? Defend myself? Argue with her? That would have only fueled the spectacle, made me look bitter, oversensitive. So I sat there, swallowing the humiliation, letting the laughter wash over me until it felt like I was drowning. What hurt most wasn't just her words. It was the silence that followed them. My father, who was standing in the corner, said nothing. My mother gave a little shrug, as if to say, "That's Sophia for you." No one stepped in to defend me, to say, "That's cruel," or "Stop." I was alone at that table, and the realization hit me harder than the words themselves. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the scene over and over, I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't the first cruel thing Sophia had said to me, but it was the loudest, the most public, the most unforgettable. And deep down, I knew it would be the moment that changed everything. From the outside, we looked like the family people dreamed of. A 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood with trimmed hedges and a white picket fence. My mother loved arranging the flower boxes beneath the windows so passers-by would stop and admire them. My father mowed the lawn every Saturday morning, nodding politely at neighbors who waved. At Christmas, our home was strung with twinkling lights that could rival a postcard. On social media, our photos were flawless, smiling faces around the dining table, coordinated outfits for holiday cards, vacation shots of us standing arm in arm. But those pictures were only half the story. Behind the doors of that house, cruelty thrived in small, constant doses. My sister Sophia was the star, the crown jewel of the family. From the time we were little, she was praised for her beauty, her grace, the way she carried herself. Teachers, neighbors, relatives, everyone gushed about her. She's stunning, just like her mother. She's destined for big things. And my parents ate it up, repeating those words back to her like affirmations. I, on the other hand, was cast in the background. "This is Natalia," my mother would say in introductions, her voice flat, almost dismissive. Where Sophia was described as beautiful, I was sweet. Where she was elegant, I was practical. And sometimes, not even that. The comparisons never stopped, subtle at first, then sharper as we grew older. My plate was scrutinized at dinner, jokes were made about my body, and whenever I wore something new, I'd hear, "That would look so much better on Sophia." Family gatherings were the worst. The house would fill with relatives complimenting Sophia, passing her plates piled high with food, while also marveling at how she stayed so slim. I'd be the one carrying dishes to the kitchen, ignored in the background, unless someone needed something. Yet when the camera was pulled out, suddenly I was summoned to smile. My mother would nudge me into place, whispering, "Stand to the side, don't slouch." The photos captured a perfect family, but they didn't capture the way my stomach twisted every time I heard another comparison, another backhanded remark. Church on Sundays wasn't much different. We'd sit in the same pew, Sophia dazzling in a pressed dress while I sat beside her, tugging at mine and feeling the eyes of neighbors slide past me to land on her. After the service, the compliments would rain down on my parents. "You have such a beautiful daughter." They never said daughters. It was always singular, and my parents never corrected them. The illusion was airtight. To the outside world, we were polished and harmonious, the Hartmans with their perfect smiles and perfect children. No one could see the fractures, the unspoken rules that governed our home. Sophia first, Natalia second. Beauty over everything. Appearances above truth. And the cruelest part was how normal it became. I learned to pose for the photos, to stand quietly in Sophia's glow, to play my part in the facade. Because in my family, perfection was never about love. It was about the show. And I had been cast as the shadow no one needed to notice. Sophia was always the golden one. Even before the wedding planning began, even before the ring sparkled on her finger, she lived in the spotlight as if she were born for it. Slim, graceful, with that effortless charm people couldn't stop admiring, she was the daughter my parents loved to parade. Every achievement she made was celebrated with fanfare. When she was voted homecoming queen in high school, my parents threw a party that felt bigger than most people's graduations. When she graduated from college, they rented out a hall, plastered her photos across the walls, and toasted her bright future. Meanwhile, my own milestones slipped quietly into the background. When I brought home a report card lined with A's, my father barely glanced up from his newspaper. When I graduated, my mother managed a polite smile, and then turned the conversation back to Sophia's job interview at a top firm. My achievements were always framed as footnotes to Sophia's brilliance. By the time she got engaged, no one was surprised. Of course Sophia would find a man like that, the relatives gushed, as if her beauty alone made her worthy of the perfect life. The engagement party was another parade of admiration. Her sparkling dress, her flawless hair, the way she moved through the crowd with ease. People circled her like moths to a flame, showering her with compliments, while I hovered near the edges, unnoticed, except when someone needed me to take another photo of her. My parents only added fuel to the fire. "Sophia has always been special," my mother cooed into the microphone at the party. "She's always been destined for this." My father raised his glass, his voice brimming with pride. "Our beautiful daughter is stepping into the life she deserves." He didn't say daughters. He never did. I was in the room, standing a few feet away, but it was as if I were invisible. The comparisons never stopped. Whenever I stood next to Sophia, people made comments they thought were harmless. "You two don't even look like sisters," someone would laugh. "Sophia must have gotten all the good genes." Another relative whispered to me once, "You're lucky to have such a gorgeous sister. She makes the family shine." I smiled weakly, but inside, the words carved me hollow. As wedding planning consumed our family, Sophia's every choice was praised like a stroke of genius. The dress she picked, the venue she secured, the colors she chose for the bridesmaids' gowns. "She has such taste," my mother bragged. "Everything Sophia does is elegant." Meanwhile, my input wasn't asked for, let alone considered. My role was to clap, nod, and fade into the background, watching her float through it all, adored and untouchable. I felt the same familiar sting I had carried my whole life. No matter what I did, no matter how much I tried, I would never be Sophia. She was the beautiful one, the golden child, the bride who was idolized before she even walked down the aisle. And me? I was just Natalia, the sister in the shadows, the one no one cared to see. The memories blur together, but the sting of them never fades. It feels like my entire childhood was a running commentary on my body, my worth measured against Sophia's reflection. At family dinners, while she was praised for being so slim, so elegant, my plate was scrutinized. If I reached for seconds, an aunt would chuckle, "Careful, Natalia, you don't want to get any bigger." If I didn't eat much, my mother would tilt her head and say, "Trying a diet again?" Well, it's not just food, it's how you carry yourself. The message was clear. No matter what I did, I was wrong, because I wasn't Sophia. The nicknames still echo in my ears. "Chunky Monkey," my cousins called me when I was little, laughing as I chased after them in the yard. "Big Nat," one of my uncles joked, like it was a term of endearment. It wasn't. Even at school events, my parents found ways to turn me into the punchline. When Sophia won another beauty pageant ribbon, I remember proudly telling them I'd gotten first place in a science competition. My mother laughed and said, "Well, at least we know which one of you got the brains, since Sophia clearly got the looks." Everyone chuckled. I stood there, holding my ribbon, feeling it shrink to nothing in my hands. That was the pattern. Every success of mine was followed by a but. Natalia is smart, but Sophia is gorgeous. Natalia works hard, but Sophia lights up a room. The word but became a hammer, flattening everything I achieved into dust. Even when I got into my first choice college, my parents smiled politely and said, "That's great, honey. But did you see how radiant Sophia looked at the party last night?" Holidays were the worst. Sophia would walk into the room in a fitted dress, and everyone would gasp like they were seeing a celebrity. Compliments poured out of their mouths. "You're stunning. Absolutely perfect. Model material." I'd stand right beside her in my best outfit, waiting for something, anything. The most I ever got was a distracted, "Natalia, you look nice too." Nice. The word tasted bitter, like a consolation prize I never asked for. Even in moments that should have been mine, the comparison crept in. At my high school graduation, as I crossed the stage to get my diploma, I spotted my family in the crowd. For a split second, I thought I'd made them proud. But afterward, all anyone talked about was how beautiful Sophia looked sitting in the audience, her hair catching the sunlight. The cruelest part was how normal it became. I laughed at the jokes, pretended the nicknames didn't cut, learned to swallow the comparisons like bitter pills. I told myself if I worked harder, achieved more, maybe someday they'd see me for who I was. But deep down, I already knew the truth. In their eyes, I would never be enough, because I wasn't Sophia. And the worst part was, they didn't even see the damage they were doing. To them, it was all harmless fun. To me, it was a lifetime of being told I didn't measure up. The bridal shower was supposed to be a celebration, but for me, it became the moment that seared itself into my memory like a scar. The room was decorated in soft blush tones, with white balloons floating near the ceiling and a long table covered in tiny sandwiches and pastel-colored cupcakes. Sophia sat at the head of it all, her chair marked with a sash that read "Bride-to-be." A plastic tiara perched on her head. She looked radiant, of course. People told her so every 5 minutes. Her friends circled her like satellites, snapping photos, clinking glasses, and showering her with compliments. I sat a few seats away, smiling politely, clapping when she opened gifts, trying to blend into the background. I had been asked to help set up that morning, not to stand beside her in any official way. Part of me hoped, quietly, that maybe she'd say something nice about me at least once, acknowledge me as her sister. Maybe she'd even ask me to stand by her side on the big day, even if not as maid of honor. A foolish hope, I know. The moment came when one of her friends, bubbly with champagne, asked, "Sophia, so who's going to be your maid of honor? Is it Natalia?" Heads turned in my direction, and for a brief, breathless second, I felt the room's attention land on me. My heart pounded. Maybe this would be the moment she'd surprise me. Instead, Sophia threw her head back and laughed. "Oh, please," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, her voice dripping with disdain. "Natalia's too fat to be my maid of honor. Can you imagine the pictures? I want this wedding to be perfect." The words hit like a slap, sharp and stinging. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before the laughter followed, rolling around the room, growing louder with every chuckle. Her friends giggled into their glasses, relatives smirked uncomfortably but said nothing, and even the older family members who should have known better gave little nods, as if it were an acceptable truth. I sat frozen, my cheeks burning, my stomach twisting into knots. My fingers dug into the edge of my chair to keep from shaking. I forced a weak smile, because what else could I do? To protest would have made me look bitter, sensitive, a killjoy. So I sat there while the room laughed at my expense, while my sister smirked like she had just delivered the punchline of the year. What hurt most wasn't just the words, it was the silence that surrounded them. My mother adjusted her necklace and pretended not to hear. My father, standing near the drinks table, didn't even look up. No one said, "That's cruel." No one defended me. I was alone in that moment, stripped bare in front of everyone, and the message was clear. My dignity was worth less than Sophia's joke. That night, I replayed the scene over and over in my head, hearing the laughter echo like a cruel chorus. Something inside me cracked, a fragile piece that had always held on to hope that maybe one day I'd be seen differently. In that room, surrounded by people who claimed to be my family, I realized the truth. They would never stop seeing me as the joke. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped waiting for them to change. I held myself together through the rest of the bridal shower, or at least I pretended to. I smiled when people looked at me, nodded when relatives made small talk, even forced out a laugh when someone tried to change the subject after Sophia's cruel remark. On the outside, I looked composed. On the inside, I was shattering. The cruelty wasn't new. I had been hearing digs about my weight, my looks, my worth for as long as I could remember. But this time, it wasn't whispered at the dinner table or muttered behind closed doors. This time, it was loud, deliberate, and public. This time, the laughter that followed didn't just sting. It broke something inside me. When I finally got home that night, I sat in the dark of my tiny bedroom and replayed it all. The sound of Sophia's voice, dripping with disdain. The echo of the laughter that rolled around the room like applause at a cruel performance. The look on my mother's face, carefully blank as if she hadn't heard a thing. My father's silence as heavy as stone. Not one person had defended me. Not one person had said, "That's too far." I realized in that moment that this was the script of my life, one I had been following since childhood. Sophia was the star, and I was the punchline. And if I stayed, that was all I would ever be. It was like a thread inside me finally snapped. For years, I had been holding on to the hope that maybe things would change, that maybe if I lost weight, dressed differently, worked harder, achieved more, my family would finally see me as something more than Sophia's opposite. But sitting in the silence of my room, I felt the truth settle over me like a heavy blanket. I could never earn their respect, because they had never planned on giving it to me. Their roles were fixed. Sophia was the beautiful one, the golden one, the daughter worth celebrating. I was the one they measured her against, the one they pointed to in order to make her shine brighter. And in that realization, anger flared where sadness had lived for so long. Not the kind of anger that makes you lash out, but the quiet, smoldering kind that pushes you to change. I didn't want to live in that script anymore. I didn't want to sit at tables where my worth was nothing but a joke. I didn't want to laugh along to cruelty just to survive another day in their world. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the tears never came. Instead, I sat up straighter, feeling that broken piece inside me harden into resolve. They would never respect me if I stayed. That much was clear. If I wanted a different story, I would have to write it myself. For the first time, I stopped asking what I needed to change to earn their love. Instead, I asked what I needed to change to love myself. And in that shift, I felt a strange kind of freedom, small but undeniable, begin to rise. In the days after the bridal shower, the air around me felt different. I carried myself through work, errands, and conversations with the heaviness of what had happened, but beneath the weight was something new: clarity. I didn't make a dramatic announcement or storm into the living room demanding an apology. I didn't scream at my parents for their silence or confront Sophia for her cruelty. I knew better than to expect remorse. They had written me into a role I never agreed to play, and the only way out wasn't through fighting. It was through walking away. So I began quietly creating distance. When the group chat buzzed with updates about bridesmaids' dresses and cake tastings, I read the messages but didn't reply. When my mother called to remind me about another fitting, I let it ring out. At first, it felt strange, like I was breaking some unspoken family rule. But the more I leaned into the silence, the lighter I felt. I packed my dignity in small, deliberate choices. I stopped showing up for their rehearsed performances. No more sitting in the background while Sophia was celebrated. No more posing for photos where I was expected to smile as the other sister. No more pretending that being excluded and humiliated was love. They could keep their perfect wedding story, their polished illusion of unity. I wanted no part of it. When relatives asked why they hadn't seen me around, I gave vague answers. I've been busy with work. I needed some space. It was easier than explaining the truth, that my family had carved me down to nothing and expected me to keep standing there as their contrast piece. I knew if I tried to explain, they would twist it. They'd call me dramatic, too sensitive, ungrateful. So I chose silence, not as surrender, but as a shield. Sophia didn't notice at first. She was too wrapped up in wedding planning, too focused on being adored to realize I was slipping out of the frame. But eventually, I received a curt message. "Are you coming to the rehearsal dinner or not?" I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring on my phone. And then I closed the screen without answering. That, I realized, was my answer. Walking away wasn't easy. Years of conditioning told me I was supposed to stay, to play the role they assigned me. But every step into silence reminded me I had a choice. I could keep bending until I broke completely, or I could leave with what was left of my self-respect intact. The closer the wedding day came, the more I felt a strange peace. They would have their perfect photographs without me. They would stand in their polished circle and pretend everything was whole. But I would know the truth. I hadn't been pushed out. I had chosen to step away. And in doing so, I finally reclaimed something they had denied me all my life: my dignity. The silence that came after I stepped back from my family was jarring at first. No more buzzing group chats about Sophia's wedding. No more passive-aggressive comments from my mother about my body or my clothes. No more humiliating jokes disguised as family humor. It was strange, almost unsettling, to live without their voices in my ear, but in that quiet, I started to hear something else. My own. I decided to invest in myself, not to prove them wrong, but because I realized I had spent years ignoring who I was outside of their judgment. For the first time, I asked myself, what do I want? Not what do they expect? The answers didn't come all at once, but I started with small steps. I joined a gym near my apartment, terrified on the first day as I walked past rows of mirrors and people who looked like they belonged. I kept my head down, starting with the basics: light weights, slow jogs, short sessions. At first it was awkward and clumsy, but gradually I found strength in the rhythm. I wasn't trying to become someone else. I wasn't chasing perfection. I was building myself piece by piece, reminding myself what my body could do instead of punishing it for what it wasn't. Each bead of sweat felt like reclaiming something they had tried to take from me: my worth, my dignity, my control. At work, I stopped hiding behind the role of being reliable but invisible. I started volunteering for projects that scared me, speaking up in meetings, and pitching ideas I used to keep to myself. To my surprise, people listened. My boss began to notice my initiative. Colleagues praised my creativity. And opportunities opened that I had once thought were for others, not me. When I earned a promotion, I stood taller, knowing it was because of my effort, my skills, not because anyone handed it to me. It was mine. Friendships, too, began to bloom in places I hadn't expected. A woman I met in a fitness class invited me out for coffee, and soon she was one of my closest confidants. My coworkers became more than colleagues. They became people I could laugh with, lean on, and celebrate with. Slowly, I built a circle of people who valued me not for how I looked standing next to them, not for whether I made their family photo appear balanced, but for who I was, for my humor, my kindness, my drive. There were nights when I still felt the ache of being excluded, of scrolling past Sophia's endless posts flaunting her perfect life. But the difference now was that those moments didn't define me anymore. I no longer sat in the corner waiting for scraps of love from people who had made it clear they would never give it. Instead, I poured my energy into the people and passions that gave back. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was building something real. A life that was mine. A life that no one could erase. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It came in pieces, slow and deliberate, like sunlight breaking through clouds. At first it was just a shift in the way I carried myself. I started walking taller, shoulders back, no longer folding into myself to take up less space. Then came the physical changes. The long hours at the gym, the healthier choices in what I ate, the discipline I had once thought I didn't have. Months passed, and the reflection in the mirror began to look different. The softness I'd been mocked for melted away, replaced by strength, definition, and a glow that came not just from weight loss, but from pride. People noticed. Strangers smiled at me on the street. The barista at my favorite cafe complimented my style one morning, and I realized I had started dressing differently, bolder, brighter, no longer hiding behind clothes meant to make me invisible. At work, my colleagues commented on my energy, my confidence. "You've changed," one of them said with a grin. "You're glowing." And I was. Not because I suddenly matched some beauty standard, but because I finally saw myself through my own eyes instead of my family's. The promotion came at just the right time. My boss called me into her office, a smile tugging at her lips as she told me I was being moved into a leadership role. I would be overseeing a team, guiding projects I once only supported from the sidelines. I left her office with a mix of disbelief and joy, holding back tears as I sat at my desk. For so long, I had been told my worth was secondary, that no matter what I achieved, it would never matter next to Sophia's beauty. And here I was, being recognized not for how I looked in a photo, but for the work I had poured myself into. Outside of work, my friendships deepened. I laughed more, louder, and freer, no longer cautious of being mocked for my voice or the way my face scrunched when I really let go. Nights with friends left my stomach aching from laughter, the kind of joy I never felt in my parents' house. I was no longer the background character, the quiet one sitting in the corner. I was present, undeniable, my presence something people welcomed. The biggest change, though, wasn't visible. It was inside me. I stopped checking Sophia's posts as if they were a scoreboard. I stopped waiting for my mother's approval or my father's acknowledgement. Their voices no longer dictated my worth. For the first time, I didn't crave their validation. I didn't need it. One evening, as I left the office after a long but fulfilling day, I caught my reflection in a shop window. My hair pulled back, my stride confident, my face glowing with the kind of happiness I once thought belonged only to other people. I smiled at myself, truly smiled, and realized something profound. The girl they called ugly, the sister they mocked, had become a woman they wouldn't even recognize. Not because she had changed for them, but because she had finally become herself. Sophia's posts flooded my feed like clockwork. Morning after morning, there she was, perfectly posed in front of bridal boutiques, standing with our mother as they clutched fabric swatches, sipping champagne with her bridesmaids in matching robes. Each photo was bathed in soft filters, every smile bright and practiced, every caption carefully crafted. Dreaming of forever with my best friend. So blessed to be surrounded by love. It was the kind of content that made strangers believe she was living a fairy tale. And me? I wasn't just absent. I was erased. Not a single mention, not a single tag. When she posted family group shots from planning dinners, she'd crop the photo, cutting me out as if I had never been there. Sometimes I wondered if she did it deliberately, or if she had convinced herself I truly didn't matter enough to include. Either way, the result was the same. In her story, I didn't exist. The comments rolled in beneath every post, an endless stream of validation. What a beautiful bride to be! Your family is gorgeous! This is goals! Friends and relatives who hadn't seen us in years fawned over the illusion, praising the unity, the perfection. They didn't know the truth. They didn't see the cruelty simmering beneath the surface. They hadn't heard her call me too fat to stand beside her, hadn't felt the sting of laughter that left me hollow. To them, we were a picture-perfect family preparing for a perfect wedding. It should have been easy to scroll past, to tell myself her posts were nothing more than curated lies. But every time I saw her face glowing with that effortless confidence, every time I read another comment worshiping the fantasy, the old ache returned. The ache of invisibility. The ache of being written out of the narrative. I'd catch myself comparing my small apartment against her polished photos, my quiet nights with friends against her extravagant parties. Then I'd remember what those pictures didn't show, the cracks I had begun to hear about in whispers, the financial strain my parents were hiding, the tension with her fiancé that no filter could erase. And yet, to the world, she was still flawless, and I was still the invisible sister no one thought to ask about. Some nights, I sat with my phone in my hand, staring at her posts, fighting the urge to comment, to tell the truth, to write. You erased me from your story, but you didn't erase what you did. But I never pressed send. I didn't want to fight for a seat at a table that had already decided I wasn't welcome. Instead, I let her flaunt her dream life to an audience that didn't know better. And in the silence, I felt something shift. Maybe erasure wasn't the insult I thought it was. Maybe it was freedom. If they wanted to write me out of their perfect little script, fine. That just meant I was finally free to write my own. The whispers came quietly, like the first cracks in glass you don't notice until the light catches them. I wasn't looking for them. I had already stepped out of Sophia's world, choosing not to orbit her endless glow. But whispers have a way of traveling, and slowly they reached me. It started with a message from an aunt. She never mentioned Sophia directly, but her words carried weight. Your parents have been stressed lately, she wrote, followed by a vague, you know how things aren't always what they seem. At first, I brushed it off. Stress was normal. But then another cousin, over coffee, dropped her voice and said, Did you hear? Sophia's fiancé is barely at home. He's always working late. Some people are saying it's more than work. I blinked at her, unsure whether to feel vindicated or uneasy. Sophia, the bride who lived for Instagram perfection, whose smile could outshine the chandelier at her bridal shower, wasn't living the dream life she portrayed. Soon, more whispers trickled in. My uncle hinted at financial troubles. Apparently, the grand venue my parents bragged about was stretching them thin. The deposits had piled up, and what was supposed to be a lavish display of wealth was quickly becoming a mountain of debt. Still, the posts online painted a different picture. Champagne glasses, designer gowns, glowing captions about blessed beginnings. The contrast was almost painful to watch. I scrolled through Sophia's updates and thought about the version of her life that wasn't being captured. The arguments behind closed doors, the late nights when her fiancé didn't come home, the bills stacking up on my parents' kitchen counter. It didn't matter how many filters she layered on her images. Reality was seeping through the cracks. But perhaps the most telling whisper came from a friend of Sophia's, who bumped into me by chance at a cafe. She looked uncomfortable, almost guilty, before finally saying, Sophia's been different lately, stressed, snappy. It's like she's holding everything together for show, but it's not working. She hesitated, then added softly, You didn't hear this from me. I walked home that evening with a strange heaviness in my chest. For years I had been the one laughed at, belittled, erased. Sophia had been untouchable, wrapped in the armor of beauty and perfection. And now, for the first time, the armor was cracking. I wish I could say I felt triumph, that I smiled at the thought of her world wobbling. But what I felt was something else, a quiet recognition. Maybe this was the truth I had always known. Perfection is fragile, and the kind built on cruelty doesn't last. The golden image was slipping, no matter how tightly my family tried to hold it in place. And as I listened to the whispers grow louder, I realized something vital. I didn't need to expose her. I didn't need to shout about what I knew. Reality was already doing the work. The world was beginning to see what I had lived my whole life. the shine was only ever an illusion. The morning of Sophia's wedding arrived like a storm I had been bracing myself for. Even though I wasn't there, I could picture it clearly. The grand venue draped in flowers, the aisle lined with candles, the guests dressed in their finest. Sophia would be dazzling, of course. She always was. She would glide down the aisle like she had been preparing her entire life for this one performance, cameras flashing, guests sighing at her beauty. But what I also pictured, and what I later heard from relatives, was the way my absence lingered like a shadow no one could ignore. Families love symmetry. They love stories that tie neatly together. A beautiful bride, her doting parents, and the supportive sister by her side. But that wasn't the picture Sophia could give them. Because I wasn't there and people noticed, guests whispered as they took their seats. "Isn't Sophia's sister supposed to be maid of honor?" someone asked. I thought she had a sibling. The question spread quietly, bouncing from table to table until it became a low hum beneath the wedding chatter. Some had seen Sophia's posts, the curated photos that never included me, and assumed maybe I lived far away. Others remembered me well and wondered why the family acted as though I didn't exist. I wasn't there to hear it, but I know the cruel words that drove me away resurfaced. They had been too loud, too public to ever be forgotten. Too fat to be maid of honor. Those words had stuck, and people remembered. A cousin told me later that during the bridal shower recap, one of Sophia's friends nervously mentioned that remark, and the laughter hadn't sounded as light-hearted as Sophia had intended. Now, at the wedding, that remark returned in whispers. Some shook their heads. Some frowned. The story of the missing sister was more intriguing than the perfection Sophia wanted them to see. My parents tried to smooth it over, of course. My mother smiled tightly, telling anyone who asked that I was busy with work. My father muttered that I didn't want to be involved. But excuses couldn't fill the empty chair that should have been mine, the family photos that looked off balance without me. In every carefully posed picture, my absence was an outline they couldn't crop away, and Sophia, for all her grace, couldn't completely hide it either. The spotlight still belonged to her, but there were cracks in the performance. A relative told me later that her smile faltered when someone innocently asked where I was. Her new in-laws gave curious glances. A few older guests whispered words like cruel and a shame. For the first time, Sophia's perfection wasn't seamless. I spent that day far from the chaos, walking through the park with friends who actually cared about me, laughing without fear of being mocked. And though I wasn't there, my absence spoke louder than if I had stood beside her. Sophia had her picture-perfect wedding, but the illusion was incomplete. And deep down, I think she knew it. When the wedding was over and the photos began to flood my feed, I didn't flinch the way I once would have. Sophia in her gown, the flowers arranged perfectly, the guests smiling, it was everything she had always wanted. And yet, as I scrolled, I noticed something the pictures couldn't hide. My absence was there in every frame. The space where I should have stood beside her was glaring, like a missing piece in a puzzle. No matter how carefully she posed, no matter how flawless the images seemed, the story they told was incomplete. For a long time, I thought that being maid of honor would mean something. That standing by my sister's side in her moment of glory would finally validate me, prove I was worthy of being seen, loved, included. But watching from afar, I realized how little that role would have meant if it required me to erase myself, to swallow her cruelty just to be part of the show. Honor isn't about wearing a dress and holding a bouquet. It's about living with dignity. and dignity was something I reclaimed the moment I walked away. Life without them wasn't easy, but it was real. I poured myself into my career, earning a promotion that gave me more freedom than I ever dreamed. I found friendships that were built on laughter, trust, and love, not on comparisons or ridicule. I built habits that made me stronger, healthier, more confident. My reflection no longer frightened me. My laugh no longer felt out of place. Slowly, I built a life that felt radiant, not in the staged, filtered way Sophia flaunted online, but in the quiet, authentic way that fills your chest and warms your skin. The contrast was undeniable. Sophia had her spotlight, but it came with cracks, whispers of financial strain, tension in her perfect marriage, pressure she tried to hide behind curated smiles. My life, while less glamorous on the surface, glowed in ways hers never could. It was built on authenticity, not illusion, on strength, not appearances, on people who valued me for who I was, not how I looked standing next to them. I no longer needed their validation. I no longer longed for their approval. The title of Maid of Honor had once felt like a crown I would never wear, proof of my place in the family story. But in the end, I learned I never needed it. I had honored myself by choosing to walk away, by refusing to be humiliated, by creating a life where my worth was no longer a question. Sophia had her wedding. She had her applause, her staged photos, her moment in the light. But I had something she could never take from me. A life that was mine. A life built from resilience, from courage, from choosing myself when no one else did. She said I was too fat to stand beside her. But I rose on my own and became the honor she could never take away. Did you enjoy the story? If so, please let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe to support us. Thanks for watching.